current cultural climate. If for no other reason, then we are online a lot more. And the questions that I'm going to be talking about in terms of identity and the Christian worldview touch on some of the things that, we find ourselves more on, things like social media, because identity seems to be the only moral absolute in our culture today. The phrase "be yourself" seems to be this generation's mantra, much more than I think it has been in decades and centuries past. The question of who am I is a big question, one that we all resonate with and we can ask. In fact, I was on social media not all that long ago, and I saw this funny post that showed a text message conversation back and forth, where the first text simply read, "I am here for you." To which the response was, "Thanks, I'm going through a tough time, so it means a lot." And sorry, I lost all my context. Who is this? This is your Uber driver. I am here to pick you up. Oh. You see, we're so desperate, a lot of us, for this this feeling of resonating, of personability with other people. And it has to do, I think, with a lot of the ultimate questions that we have about identity. Identity is a huge conversation in our culture today. You hear phrases all the time like "be yourself" or "live your truth." And the concept of who we are is a big question. However, at the same time, I'm speaking to you as a Christian, and the topic of identity also sits at the heart of what it means to be a Christian. Christians are not people who are trying to be better people. Christians have gotten a new identity as a gift, and I'll touch on that a little later on. Yet our late modern culture's approach to identity also seems to, in of itself, be having, ironically, an identity crisis. There is more talk than ever about how we should identify and who we should identify as, and living out our quote unquote true identity. And yet there are a lot of questions, a lot of confusions about what any of that really means. Identity is a stable self-understanding in terms of its definition. But I think when we get to the heart of this, questions of who our character and personality and virtue are more complicated than maybe it seems at face value. In other words, we're asking the question, who am I? But we have a problem because our culture's approach to identity seems to communicate freedom and clarity, but when we dig into it, when we look behind the surface, it actually looks more like confusion than clarity. In fact, as I was putting together and thinking about this topic for this presentation, a clip of a movie came to mind. A movie, by the way, that I do not condone people watching. Tropic Thunder. It's not actually an appropriate movie. I can soundly say that when I watched this movie, I was not in a good place spiritually, and I'll chalk it up to my total depravity. But there is one scene in there. There's one particular scene where Robert Downey Jr.'s character, who is a white man who's basically, I mean, this can show you how long ago it was made. It's a little bit politically incorrect. He's playing a black character, and so he's like got into this character, but he's totally confused. And there's a particular clip that's actually a little bit humorous, but I think when I was putting together this presentation and thinking about some of the identity crises that we have, it's kind of like this.
I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
What?
You a dude that don't know what dude he is.
Or are you a dude who has no idea what dude he is and claims to know what dude he is?
It's confusing, right? It's a weird clip. I'm a dude playing a dude who's pretending to be another dude. Now, I think this exemplifies, it is exemplified rather, in the words of a recent philosopher, Elsa of Arundel. In This particular philosopher's musings, she says, let it go, can't hold it back anymore. Let it go, turn away and slam the door. I don't care what they're going to say. Let the storm rage on. The cold never bothered me anyway. Now, this is what actual philosophers call expressive individualism or progressive individualism. In other words, you need to express all your thoughts and your actions and your desires, all the things that pop into your head. Otherwise, you're simply not being yourself. We see sort of echoes of that in things like the Disney movie Frozen. But if you backtrack and look throughout history, there's been different examples of how identity has played out. There's a famous writing that comes from the 10th century, the Battle of Maldon, and what it chronicles is the Anglo-Saxons fighting the Danes, and the Anglo-Saxons stand their ground, and one of the characters, a guy named Brithwold, shakes his spear of ash and says, "Here lies our king slain. I will not away, but I will stand and die here beside my lord." And in the Old English, it actually rhymes. It's a song. An identity and purpose in times past, we can see, was grounded in things like self-sacrifice and virtue. Character was seen as synonymous with identity. And yet, if we skip a little bit ahead in time, but even in our own past, we get other songs. Climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow till you find your dream. That sounds a little bit different. There's a little bit of a different tenor to it. Francis Spufford, who's a British author, he says, "You are a being whose wants make no sense. They don't harmonize. Your desires deep down, are discordantly arranged so that you truly want to possess and you truly don't want to at the very same time." If you look into your heart to say, "I'm going to follow my desires," you'll find out pretty quickly that they're going to contradict. So which desire are you going to choose? I mean, I know even with myself, my emotions change from, month to month, week to week, day to day, especially in a time when I'm locked down in quarantine. What does following my desires look like in a time frame like this? It looks a little bit different. I think I shared this with you guys last time, but I want to bring it back for those who didn't hear my talk back in March, because a big part of the identity question for me personally is related to the fact that just before my 11th birthday, I was diagnosed with a rare neurological condition that left me paralyzed from the waist down. And as I shared with you last time, the short story is that I was home on a Wednesday with the flu from school. I was home from school, and I'd gone down for a nap mid-afternoon, and when I woke up, I couldn't feel my legs. And I eventually called my parents, who called an ambulance, and I was rushed from one hospital to the next, in which time I was diagnosed with a rare neurological condition that left me as a paraplegic. The condition is called acute transverse myelitis, which is a word you can forget as soon as you hear it. And the short answer to all this is that I'm not paralyzed anymore. And that 1 month from the day that I got up and I couldn't feel my legs, I got out of bed, I walked over to my wheelchair, and I sat down. And this marked a very powerful supernatural experience for me, as I was told by medical professionals that the likelihood of me walking wouldn't happen. And then to go literally from that to 180ing and being totally normal, totally quote unquote normal once again. And so as part of that experience, I thought, God has allowed me to experience taking advantage of something as simple as not being able to walk out of the room. And so eventually what I did is I invested a lot of time and effort into athletics. As Trevor mentioned, I went to York University. I ran varsity track and field at York University, and I did decently. But I had a lot of my identity at that particular time wrapped up in my success as a sprinter. And that had a toll as I was training with individuals who were far more naturally talented than me. And I had this attitude that that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. The problem was the talent was working hard, and I was pushing myself to limits that my body couldn't handle, and I got injured. And that was a real struggle for me, because I had convinced myself that my whole paralysis experience was because God was doing something in my life in which I would become a professional track and field athlete. I would go to the Olympics. I'd be like Eric Little in Chariots of Fire, and show God's glory through that. And yet I got injured. And my seasons all of a sudden were shorter than I expected, and my results were not nearly as close or even touching on what I thought they would be. And I really struggled with that for a long time. And I'd convinced myself that, almost wrapping my own personal selfish identity up in spiritual terms, that God was doing a work here, but really it was self-focused. I was focused on myself. And I think we can wrap our identities up in all sorts of things, whether it's athletics, whether it's achievement, whether it's notoriety, whether it's success. But back when our parents were growing up, you more or less had one self. Obviously, there were those types of identity issues, but the person who you were around your family and your friends and those other people around you, that was largely who you were. While you may have acted a little different around certain people or groups, you were still your single real world you. But we aren't our parents, are we? We're the internet generation. Our phones are basically extension of our bodies, and to even call them phones seems a little bit silly, considering that the vast majority of what I do on my phone has absolutely nothing to do with phoning anyone. But we grew up with smartphones and social media. And for the first time, we are able to live our days with others online. I can be connected with you who are nowhere near me, with people across the world. And just it seemingly is understood as connecting with friends that I meet and see every day. Yet this creates a huge problem, doesn't it? It creates a problem because it makes the world that we live in a little bit more complicated. Am I the same person in real life as I am online? And my online self looks like Wes. He talks like Wes, has most of the same dreams and aspirations and goals, but isn't really all of Wes. We live in a world where we can share more of ourselves publicly than ever previously possible. We choose not to. Online, I could be more like a highlight reel than my actual self. And at face value, this seems great. I mean, who wouldn't want to be perceived and seen as their best selves? The best version of them that they could put out into the world. But it's a question of at what cost this newfound control comes at. When you get to carefully select every image and presentation of your online self, it starts to differ from the real world you. Now, on its own, this could be completely fine, but the problem is that we are creatures made for things like connection and community, support, and validation, which makes the meaning question a little bit more complicated. The reality is that if we're going around choosing our own meaning, that only goes so far. You see, if truth is subjective, if it's grounded in the subject and who you are, in that manner, then we're going to run into issues. The question of meaning is a huge one, and it's intrinsically linked with the question of identity and the question of purpose. Going back to what I was talking about a moment ago, one of the reasons social media can be so tricky is because we take those internal metaphysical longings of ours, good ones that we're created to be and exemplify, and then we turn that connection entirely into validation. We turn it into a game. Ironically, we start to slowly attach our self-worth to numbers or favorites or likes or shares or retweets and views. We create and we learn and we repeat. We create and we learn and we repeat until before we know it, we're more brand than personality, and that can be dangerous. And while I do think technology is largely a neutral tool, if you think about it kind of like money, it's not a good or an evil in and of itself, but it depends how we view it and what we use it for that can make it a net positive or a net negative. However, if we buy into the secular thesis that there is no purpose and we create our own destiny to grasp onto something before our inevitable demise, then in a world where the transcendent has been flattened, this spiral of curation may or may not be all that bad. It may seem like we're actually living out the purpose and meaning and destiny that we think we want, that we think we deserve. The famous atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell, at the turn of the century, said humanity is the product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving. Your origin, growth, hopes, and fears, your loves and beliefs are but the outcomes of an accidental collection of atoms. It's a little bit dreary. Why don't we liven it up? The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. You are DNA, and DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. We could go even further down the rabbit hole of how atheists talk about reality. The late Christopher Hitchens said to the dumb question, why me, the cosmos barely bothers to return the reply, why not? I mean, drawn to its ultimate conclusions, when we look at the secular culture that we live in, it really doesn't supply very much in terms of substantial answers, in terms of breaking through a lot of the confusion with clarity. And that's where I think the gospel is powerful. Because the gospel says you matter more than you are matter. Things like social media numbers don't validate you as people. You can't rely on them in real life. Be authentic online. But remember that behind the highlight reel is an actual person. A person with needs and desires and hopes and dreams. A person who is fearfully and wonderfully made by a creator who loves them. True purpose is received. It's not achieved. And if we're talking about identity, I think the problem we have in terms of the world that we live in is that if you look at any worldview, whether that's non-religious or religious, it really boils down to one of three things. It says, do this and you'll be accepted, or feel this and you'll be accepted, or think this and you'll be accepted. I mean, we see that in a lot of the isms around the world that we look at, in Hinduism and Islamism and Judaism, in secularism. It's either one of those three or a combination of them, the do, the feel, the think. I do, therefore I am accepted. The problem is, while every system follows those rules, whether the rules are imposed or mandated, or whether the rules are something we've created for ourselves, from society or from your family or from your religion, if you follow those rules, then you're going to have a stable sense of self, we're told. But the Christian worldview is unique because it flips the system around. In fact, it says you can't do it by yourself. You can't feel enough of what you're looking for. You can't think your way to joy. You see, instead of the endless treadmill, Christianity does not say, I do, therefore I'm accepted. It says, I am accepted, therefore I do. The doing and the feeling and the thinking, they're not bad. We are called to these things as followers of Christ, but they're not the starting point. Christianity turns the ladder upside down. In the Gospel of Matthew, that biography of Jesus' life, chapter 11, verses 28 to 29, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Friends, like I said before, true purpose is received, not achieved. This invitation, though, let me put a caveat to this. While it is unconditioned in that it invites all to come as they are, it is not unconditional. Jesus calls you to come as you are, but he loves you too much to leave you where you are. This invitation is unconditioned, but it is not unconditional. Let me just finish with this. Tim Keller puts it this way. He says, to be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. It is what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense, humbles us out of our self-righteousness, and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us. Christianity flips the script. The Christian worldview changes the dynamic. Unlike the survival of the fittest, Christianity says that the fittest steps down and sacrifices himself for the survival of the weakest. And that makes all the difference.